The racing genre doesn't see a lot of innovation typically. You have your standard controls, car goes forward, gas goes on. Of course, over the last couple decades, they've added nitrous and drifting to keep things a little more interesting, but that's about it. For that reason, it took me by surprise that I found a new novel mechanic in a drift-based racing game, and it came from a very unexpected source, an indie racing game called Inertial Drift. And the change is so simple too. Generally, in a racing game, when you drift, the car starts to drift and you continue to drive as you normally would. In Inertial Drift, as you start to drift, you control your drift with the right stick while you drive with the left stick. This is almost like when they changed first-person shooters from being more like tank controls to being left stick, right stick operated. Once we started doing that control scheme, we never went back, and I have a feeling that this may be the new template for how we do drift-based racing. But while I have nothing but praise for the control scheme in this game, I do have a lot of criticisms about how this game was put together overall. So you realize going into an indie-based racing game that you're going to see potentially some features cut back, and that is very true here. There's a number of game modes. They have an arcade mode, a story mode, a Grand Prix mode, you can do split screen, you can do online play, and inside the arcade mode there's a score attack and a time attack. It seems like a huge number of different modes. The problem is that everything feels really samey across the board. For instance, Time Attack is your typical time attack mode. You're going to just race by yourself down the track and get your best score. Then there's Ghost mode, which you can run against your ghost or another ghost that's been pre-recorded and try to race against just that one ghost. But it ends up kind of feeling like Time Attack because you're really just racing a ghost. But then there's racing a normal competitor. And when you race a normal competitor, you're only racing one other car. Only in this game, you can't actually collide with that car. You do this phase shifting thing where you go right inside them. So the difference between that and a ghost, I'm not 100% sure, but it ends up feeling the exact same there. Score mode does present a new and novel approach to racing games where you can drift and earn points, and the higher your score, the better medals you get. It's an interesting mode overall, but I had a hard time determining what exactly I was getting points for. With a little more practice, it might have been a little more comfortable, but it did feel a little bit random as far as what my score was in the end. Additionally, when you're racing somebody one-on-one, there are a couple different modes you can do. You can do a straight-up race where you're trying to just beat them at the end of 3 rounds, but you could also do what's called a duel. And in a duel, there's a point system, and you attribute points as you outperform your opponent. If you're ahead, you'll start to get points. If they get ahead, they'll start to get points. It's very similar in execution to the way that a normal race would work, but this one has a little bit of a different approach, and so it was a nice addition to have. Across the board, though, you could really tell that you were only racing one opponent or no opponent, and so the end result is a game that, while it controls really well, constantly feels very lonely, which is a weird feeling to have in a racing game. The story mode, though, is populated with lots of characters, and you go through what seems to be kind of the tutorial of the game where they're teaching you how to race, and each of the racers between each different mission that you do gives you a little bit of an uplifting message and tells you about different tactics for how you could race. The unfortunate problem here is that when I went into story mode, I was kind of expecting something that was more like Fast and the Furious, and the execution is a lot more like Saved by the Bell. After just the first few chapters, the dialogue and the story became very bland, and it ended up being more of a mode like it was just a series of missions with this filler in between it than something that was actually consisting of substance. Beyond the story mode and the various arcade modes that I had previously covered, there's also the Grand Prix mode, and this one sets you up with a number of different races where you race against different opponents. You get so many different retries, and if you win, you start to unlock Unlockables. The problem here is that these races feel like more of the same from all of the other modes. The difference here is the unlockables, and let's talk a little bit about those unlockables. One tried and true game mechanic that has been really prevalent across a lot of racers these days is that you get small incremental changes to what your garage is over time. Whether that be you get money and then you buy new cars or you buy more parts, there's always this incremental change towards what you have that keeps you getting back into the driver's seat. You get into a race, you earn a little bit of cash, you earn a new car, and then you get back into the driver's seat because you want to test that new car, test that new thing. In Inertial Drift, there really aren't that many unlockables in the game, and you don't ever feel like you're earning anything. While you may get medals, they seem to be shallow. There needs to be more fanfare. There needs to be more cash, more something. You have to be doing something in the game to get you back in the driver's seat. Because when you don't have that incentive that other games have, and then you have a gameplay style that is very samey, like I've already identified, and you pair those two things together, the game feels very driveless, which is a weird thing to say about a racing game. Outside the substance and the content of the game, we also have the aesthetic. This is the overall sound effects and the design and just the way the game looks and feels. And here I can say it's spectacular. I really like that what they've gone with is this retro early 90s, late 80s, almost Miami Vice feel. And the soundtrack works with all of this. Every race seems to be taking place at sunset, and most everything is very teal and very pink. The color palette just works. It all kind of comes together and feels right. I have no complaints about the way that they styled this game overall. It feels like a very cool retro racing game. So who is this game for, and is it worth it? I really think that this one is for people that enjoy racing games. If you're someone who plays other racing games, particularly drift-based racing games, I kind of feel like you really need to buy this game just to feel what that control scheme feels like. Now, the content may be more or less shallow for you. You may find that it's got a ton of stuff for you, a lot of diversity, and you may love it, but you may also find it a little more shallow than me. Be on the lookout though, because every mode does feel quite similar. For anyone that doesn't typically play racing games, is just looking for some new experience, this is not where I would start with racing games. Go find a Burnout game, go find a Midnight Club game, go play Gran Turismo. I know those are all very, very different. You'd have to look at those individually to see which one would be good for you, but this one probably isn't it, because this game doesn't seem to have a ton of longevity, and overall it's going to lack a lot of mainstream appeal. Coming up with a score, I'm going to give Inertial Drift 75 pixels out of 100. If you liked this video, then leave a like on this video. Helps my channel out quite a bit. If you haven't subscribed yet, go take a look at some of my other reviews, and if you like those, consider subscribing. Until next time, this has been Pixel.